Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where bread is not a comfort food but a daily gamble with your health. The streets outside are still wrapped in fog, the lamps burning low, and you step into a Victorian bakery long before dawn. The air is heavy, coal smoke mixed with the sharp tang of yeast and the sweetness of dough. It sounds cozy at first, but don't get too comfortable. This is a job where flour dust can suffocate you, chemicals can poison you, and coal smoke can ruin your lungs. You probably won't survive this shift, but hey, at least the bread will rise beautifully. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to comment with your location and the local time right now, because there's something magical about knowing where in the world you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge in with the apprentices, boots leaving damp prints on the stone floor. The bakery's oven already glows red, roaring with coal that's been burning since yesterday. Victorian bakers often worked insane hours, 12, 14, sometimes 18, because bread was a sunrise staple. People expected their loaves hot and ready at first light. And so you, bleary-eyed, are already elbow-deep in flour before the city stirs awake. The oven is the heart of this place. It's a hulking brick beast, wide enough to swallow dozens of loaves at once. Stoking it requires not just muscle but nerve. Sparks spit back when you feed the coal, and the heat can singe eyebrows in an instant. One careless move, and you might tip too close. Burns were so common that many bakers wore scars like badges. Historians still argue whether bakers were considered craftsmen or more like expendable laborers. What's certain is that nobody envied them. And the smell, it's not only comforting yeast and crust. There's the acrid undertone of coal fumes, mingling with damp clothing. You breathe shallowly, because the smoke clings to your throat. Long exposure to this mixture slowly eats away at lungs, but back then, nobody really called it an occupational hazard. It was just life. One quirky tidbit. Some bakers swore that the smoky taste actually improved their bread, a sort of accidental seasoning. Customers, perhaps numbed by constant exposure, didn't complain too much. You roll dough by hand, slapping it onto the workbench, flour puffing into the air. It drifts everywhere, into hair, ears, the tiny cracks of skin. You'll carry that smell with you all day. The dough itself is sticky, elastic, alive with yeast. You push and fold, again and again, muscles aching. And here's the cheeky part, the harder you work now, the more someone else will happily devour it later without thinking twice about the sweat or risk behind their morning toast. Across the room, apprentices haul sacks of flour. Each sack weighs far more than a child should lift, but apprenticeships didn't ask whether you were strong enough, they asked if you could endure. The sacks are dusty, sometimes damp, sometimes crawling with a surprise or two. Vermin loved bakeries, and rats were nearly guaranteed roommates in the flour bins. The apprentices grumble, but quietly. Nobody wants to test the master baker's patience at this hour. The heat rises fast. Within minutes, you feel sweat bead on your back, dripping into the flour dust clinging to your skin. It itches, burns a little, but you can't stop to scratch. The rhythm is relentless, knead, shape, load. The fire hisses, a steady roar. For a strange moment, it feels like you're inside a furnace yourself, part of the bread-making process, breaking down slowly like dough in heat. And just outside, the city snores on, blissfully unaware that you're practically sacrificing health to keep their breakfast ready. It's a quiet, unseen world, hidden before dawn, vanished by late morning, when the bread is out, and your body is spent. The oven door slams, rattling the room. Sparks leap up, casting red light across faces streaked with flour. One man coughs, a deep, hacking cough that everyone ignores. They all have it. It's part of the job. You wipe your brow with a floury sleeve, breathing shallow, waiting for the bell of the next shift, when apprentices will be pushed harder, and the oven will blaze even brighter. Your stomach growls, but you laugh softly at the irony. You're surrounded by food and might not get a crumb till midday. That's the cruel rhythm here. You make sustenance for the masses but rarely taste it fresh yourself. By the time the first gray streaks of dawn slip through the shutters, you've already been working for hours. The bread is rising, swelling in neat rows. To anyone else, it looks magical, but you know it's just labor, sweat, and a dangerous environment disguised as warmth. And this is only the beginning, the first need in a long day where every breath carries invisible risks. The bell clangs before the sky has even decided what color it wants to be. It's not the cheerful ding of a church steeple, but a rough, metallic clatter hung near the master baker's doorway, yanked hard by a cord. That sound is the alarm clock of apprentices, half children, half workers, dragged from straw pallets in the back rooms, eyes sticky with sleep, bodies already aching from yesterday's load. You shuffle forward with them, feet reluctant, but the rhythm of the bakery allows no pause. In Victorian times, apprenticeships weren't optional summer jobs, they were contracts binding young boys, sometimes as young as 12, even younger if the family was desperate, to years of service. A baker's apprentice was expected to live on site, to obey without hesitation, and to treat exhaustion as normal. You, in this role, rub your eyes and yawn into the dark, but the master's stare quickly cuts that short. His patience is measured in loaves, not kindness, the first duty. Lugging sacks of flour that feel like they outweigh you. Each one might tip the scale at 100-weight, and you wrestle it onto your back with awkward strength. Flour dust explodes in your face, into your hair, up your nose. Your lungs protest instantly, but no one offers sympathy. A small cough, and another apprentice elbows you sharply, keep it down, or you'll draw attention. Apprentices understood early that attention usually meant trouble. Harsh discipline shaped the hierarchy here. Some masters cuffed an ear if dough was dropped, others lashed with sharp words or sharper hands. A forgotten loaf, a burned crust, a sack ripped open at the seams, each mistake cost not just product but reputation. And in this trade, reputation was bread itself. Historians still argue whether apprenticeships were exploitative child labor or a necessary training ground. What's certain, survival meant obedience. As the morning drags forward, you notice something oddly cruel. Apprentices often slept mere hours a night, jolted awake well before dawn and pushed until the city's bell towers rang noon. By then, you've already done half a day's work. Imagine trying to sneak in homework or daydreaming about cricket matches, forget it. Your world is flour, ovens, scolding, and the hope of someday earning the title of journeyman. Yet here's a quirky little tidbit: some apprentices, despite the punishing schedule, developed a curious pride in their skill. The ability to feel dough just right with a single poke, or to sense oven temperature by holding a bare hand inside for a heartbeat, became tiny badges of honor. In a way, those tricks were their survival, because the faster and smoother you moved, the less wrath you attracted. Plus, it looked impressive to new boys who hadn't learned the ropes yet. The bell itself becomes a character in your day. It rings for shifts, rings for delivery carts, rings when the master wants every head turned. That clang slices through even your dreams if you're lucky enough to nap during a lull. You joke, quietly, that you'll hear it ringing in your head for the rest of your life, though no one's really laughing. By mid-morning, you're sweaty, dusted in white, and worn down to the bone. You lean briefly on a sack, only to be ordered upright again. Apprenticeship, after all, was about breaking habits, slouching, idleness, even independent thought. Bread waits for no one. Still, there's a strange comfort to routine. You learn the rhythm of kneading, the cadence of lifting, the timing of deliveries. When your master finally shoves a crust into your hand, stale, often the heel of a loaf, you bite into it with the hunger of someone who's burned through every calorie before sunrise. And yes, it tastes good, even if it's flecked with coal grit. The apprentices bond in whispered moments, trading stories of their families or joking about how flour dust makes them look prematurely gray. They speak quietly, because walls have ears, but laughter, however small, softens the load. You catch yourself grinning when someone remarks that, if nothing else, you'll be impossible to kidnap in the future. After all, who could haul away a flour-dusted boy without sneezing for hours? As the day stretches on, the bell rings again. This time, it signals deliveries. Apprentices race to load wooden trays with steaming loaves, balancing them like circus performers. The streets outside are waking up, customers waiting, hungry children pulling at mothers' skirts. The apprentices' labor is invisible to them, bread simply appears, warm and golden, without the memory of pre-dawn drudgery. You watch a child snatch a loaf eagerly, and you feel a flicker of pride. It's your blistered hands, after all, that shaped that moment of comfort. But as you drag yourself back inside, sweat drying cold against your skin, you realize the day isn't close to ending. That bell will toll again. And again. And until your contract years finally expire, your life will be bound by that relentless clanging rhythm, the sound that ties your youth to the deadly, exhausting work of Victorian baking. The coal pile looms like a dark mountain in the corner of the bakery yard, each lump glistening with a faint oily sheen. You grab the shovel, grip it with both hands, and start scooping, muscles already trembling from the morning's flour sacks. Coal isn't just fuel here, it's lifeblood. Without it, the oven's great brick mouth would cool, the dough would sag flat, and the customers would riot when they found no loaves at dawn. You shovel fast, but every toss sends up sparks of dust that sting your eyes and coat your tongue in bitterness. Victorian bakeries were heated by these coal-fired ovens, vast chambers built into thick masonry walls. The fire burned in a pit beneath or behind, and the heat radiated upward into the chamber where rows of loaves sat. It was a clever design for volume baking, but not exactly safe for those who stood near it all night. Every time you open the iron hatch, waves of heat slap your face, drying your lips and making your eyelashes crinkle. Your hands, already raw from kneading, sting as the dry blast cracks your skin further. The smoke lingers low, curling like gray ribbons across the ceiling beams. You inhale carefully, but even so, a cough rattles in your chest. Historians still argue whether bakers recognized the long-term dangers of coal smoke or chalked up their breathlessness to simply getting older. What is clear is that bakers developed chronic bronchitis, lung weakness, and a rasping cough often before middle age. They were basically slow roasting their insides while crisping bread on the outside. A quirky tidbit for you: in some parts of London, customers claimed they could tell which bakery a loaf came from just by its smoky flavor. Some preferred one oven's distinctive tang, as if coal dust was the secret ingredient. That's one way to brand your product, though probably not the healthiest. Imagine modern bakeries boasting, now with extra smog. You lean closer to stoke the fire, sweat trickling down your spine. The master warns you, never breathe too deeply when adding coal. Why? Because the sudden surge of smoke can choke you unconscious. Apprentices sometimes collapsed in front of open ovens, dragged out only when someone noticed their absence. No wonder your body tenses as you heft the shovel, trying not to lose your balance. And then there are the gases, silent, invisible, deadly. Carbon monoxide slips through the room without odor, without taste, quietly stealing oxygen from the blood. No one in your era has words like carbon monoxide poisoning, but they know the symptoms well enough: dizziness, pounding headaches, sudden nausea. You laugh weakly when another baker mutters that the ovens drink your breath. You suspect he isn't wrong. The heat doesn't stay politely by the oven either. It radiates through the whole room, raising the temperature until your shirt clings to your back like a damp rag. You wipe your brow with a floury arm, which instantly turns to paste against your skin. Your hair curls with sweat, your lips crack from the dryness. Yet the master still shouts, "More coal." The loaves are swelling beautifully, and if the fire falters even for a moment, the day's work could collapse into a heap of failed dough. There's also the constant fear of fire leaping beyond its brick cage. Many bakeries were tinderboxes, flour dust hanging in the air, wooden beams overhead, and coal sparks eager to escape. Fires started quickly, spread mercilessly, and could get not just the shop but the entire row of houses. One baker you overheard told of sparks igniting his apron. He flailed like a scarecrow until another worker doused him with water meant for dough. He laughed about it later, but his arms bore the shiny scars forever. You pause for a breath of cooler air near the doorway, where the street breeze sneaks in. It smells faintly better. Horse manure mixed with fog is oddly refreshing compared to the suffocating interior. You almost pity the customers waiting outside, stomping their feet in the chill, never knowing that the warm loaves they crave are birthed in an atmosphere of smoke and sweat and constant danger. And back you go, shovel in hand, muscles aching, lungs burning, the glow of the oven painting your face an eerie orange. You feed the beast, keep it satisfied, because in this world, the fire doesn't care if you collapse, it only cares that the bread rises. The flour barrels stand in neat rows, lids barely holding back the pale powder inside. At first glance, it seems harmless, soft, white, almost angelic in its way. But the moment you slam a scoop into the barrel, a cloud bursts upward, hanging in the air like a ghost. You breathe in instinctively, and it scratches down your throat, settling deep in your chest. You cough, eyes watering, but everyone around you keeps moving. To them, this choking haze is just another Tuesday. Victorian bakers lived inside flour storms. Every knead, every sift, every slammed sack filled the room with particles too fine to see clearly, yet impossible to avoid. They coated shelves, clung to clothing, even drifted onto eyelashes. You try to wipe your face, but your hand leaves a fresh streak of white. Breathing becomes a strange negotiation. You learn to take shallow sips of air rather than deep gulps. Still, your lungs ache with every inhale. Baker's asthma, physicians eventually called it, though back then it had other names, baker's lung, the cough, or simply weak chest. Historians still argue whether people recognized it as a genuine occupational disease or brushed it off as bad luck. Whatever the label, the symptoms were unmistakable: relentless coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath, and eventually, in many cases, premature death. Here's the quirky part: some bakers claimed they could identify apprentices by the sound of their cough alone. A rasping bark meant a boy had worked 3 years. A softer wheeze? He was still a beginner. It was like an eerie, unintentional roll call of lung damage echoing through the bakery. The flour haze doesn't just choke, it ignites. Few knew it then, but flour dust hanging in the air is highly combustible. A stray spark from the coal shovel, and the entire room could explode in a fireball. Modern safety inspectors wince when they read accounts of Victorian bakeries, because workers essentially labored inside giant powder kegs without realizing it. You imagine sneezing at the wrong moment and triggering your own fireworks show. Not the kind of grand finale anyone wanted. You bend over the workbench, pressing and folding dough. Every slap of your hand sends another puff into the air. Your arms burn, your back aches, and your chest tightens. The master doesn't notice. Or perhaps he does, but he's long past caring. To him, the flour haze is as invisible as the air itself. It's simply part of the job, and complaining would be as absurd as complaining about rain. By midday, your nose is clogged with pale dust, and when you spit discreetly into the ash bucket, the phlegm comes out streaked white. You stare at it for a moment, unsettled, then wipe your mouth quickly before anyone sees. You're not alone. Every man and boy here clears his throat endlessly, sounding like a chorus of creaking doors. The sound blends with the oven roar, forming the strange music of the bakery. And yet, oddly enough, flour itself was precious, guarded like treasure. Entire communities depended on its steady supply. A stolen sack could mean hunger for a family or a baker's ruin. During shortages, riots sometimes broke out, with angry crowds storming bakeries, accusing them of hoarding. Flour was power, and you, coughing and pale, are one of its keepers. You glance around the room and notice how pale everyone looks, though not just from exhaustion. The flour coats skin so thickly that bakers often walked home looking ghostly, like spectral figures drifting through the streets at dawn. Children supposedly laughed, calling them the walking loaves. A strange badge of honor. Perhaps, but also a sign of the dust slowly carving away their health. Even at night, lying on your straw pallet, you feel it. The flour dust clings inside your nose, tickling, suffocating, making you cough until your ribs ache. Sleep comes in short, shallow stretches, broken by the hacking of other apprentices nearby. You roll over, press your face into the bedding, and try not to think about what your lungs are becoming, and when morning comes, the barrels wait again, patient and full, ready to fill the air with another storm. The dough must be kneaded, the bread must rise, and your breath, well, your breath is just another sacrifice to keep the city fed. You reach for the flour barrel again, but this time the master is already there, tossing something into the mix. You blink, unsure what you just saw. Was that chalk dust? Alum? Maybe even a scoop of ground-up bone. He gives you a look that warns against asking questions, so you keep kneading. Welcome to the shadowy world of adulterated bread, where the loaves are white, light, and deadly. In Victorian Britain, bread was a staple so important it practically counted as currency. But pure white flour was expensive, and customers demanded it, convinced that whiteness meant quality. Bakers, under pressure to stretch their supplies and keep loaves cheap, often turned to additives. Alum, a chemical used in tanning leather, was the favorite. It made flour look whiter, loaves feel lighter, and profits rise. The catch? It also shredded stomach linings and left many people doubled over in pain, and alum wasn't the only villain. Chalk powder whitened bread, plaster of Paris bulked it out, and even ground-up bones or gypsum found their way into the mix. Historians still argue whether every baker knowingly poisoned his customers or whether some were simply following standard practice without thinking much about the consequences. Either way, the average Victorian breakfast sometimes came with a side of low-level toxicity. Quirky fact, there's a record of one baker experimenting with mashed potatoes to bulk out his dough. Oddly enough, it worked, and potato bread eventually became a genuine recipe rather than a scam. But for every creative twist, there were dozens of shady shortcuts. Imagine biting into toast sprinkled invisibly with chalk, the crunch not from crust but from grit. Delicious, right? You work the dough, feeling it sticky between your fingers, but the knowledge gnaws at you. This loaf isn't just flour, water, salt, and yeast, it's a chemistry set. Customers will line up outside, clutching pennies, never knowing the difference until their stomachs ache later. They'll probably blame indigestion, not realizing their baker has been moonlighting as an amateur poisoner. Sometimes bakers adulterated out of desperation, sometimes greed. Flour went moldy in damp warehouses. Rather than discard it, bakers mixed it with fresh stock and masked the musty taste with chemicals. Rotten grain? No problem, just bleach it white and knead it in. The logic was brutal but simple. Hungry customers couldn't afford to be picky, and bread riots were easier to handle than bankruptcy. And there's the cruel irony, you, the baker's apprentice, inhale flour all day. Cough yourself nearly senseless, and still end up complicit in selling adulterated bread. You wonder if your own stomach will survive the scraps you're sometimes allowed to eat. The master doesn't care, his eye is on the profit, his hand quick with the alum scoop. Inspectors occasionally showed up, armed with newfangled tests for adulterants. But inspections were sporadic, and enforcement was inconsistent. Some bakers were fined, others warned, but most carried on, confident they could dodge the law. The public grew suspicious, rumors spreading that every crust was a gamble. The phrase staff of life began to sound grimly ironic. The bread cools on the racks, golden and perfect to the eye. You watch a mother outside by a loaf, smiling as her children tear into it eagerly. They chew happily, crumbs scattering, blissfully unaware of the hidden cocktail inside. You swallow hard, your throat dry. What you helped make might fill them today, but slowly, invisibly, it could shorten their lives, and yet, when the bell rings again, you turn back to the barrels, ready to knead the next batch. Because the bread must rise, and survival, for baker and customer alike, depends on a system dusted with chalk, shaded in alum, and baked in fire. The loaves cool in tidy rows, but you barely pause before the next task. Today the master reaches for a jar, powdered, sharp-smelling, and definitely not yeast. He tips some into a jug of water, stirs it briskly, and pours the mix into the dough trough. You watch curiously as the dough froths unnaturally fast, swelling in minutes instead of hours. Welcome to the experimental world of chemical leavening, where patience gives way to quick fixes. Yeast had always been the trusted companion of bakers, coaxing dough to rise with steady bubbles of fermentation. But yeast was temperamental, too warm and it died, too cold and it sulked, too wet and it soured. Victorian bakers, already under punishing schedules, looked for ways to cut corners. Chemicals like alum, already whitening the flour, and ammonium carbonate, known cheerfully as smelling salts, became baking partners. They sped up the rise but left a bitter trace. Historians still argue whether most bakers fully understood the chemistry or just knew it works. Don't ask why. The line between innovation and recklessness blurred quickly. Some bakers experimented with hydrochloric acid to treat flour, claiming it improved texture. Yes, you heard that right, acid. Nothing like a slice of toast that doubles as a chemistry experiment. Here's the quirky tidbit: ammonium carbonate, when heated, breaks down into ammonia gas. So when bread baked with it was pulled from the oven, the room reeked faintly of cat litter. Bakers joked about it, but customers rarely noticed, because their noses were already full of coal smoke and city smog. You need the chemically boosted dough, noticing how it resists differently, more elastic, somehow less alive than yeast-fed batches. It feels strange under your palms, like dough that skipped a vital heartbeat. You imagine a future where bread loses its living soul, replaced entirely by powders and tricks. But right now, you just follow orders, because arguing with the master would earn you nothing but sore ears. Chemical leavening also carried risks for the bakers themselves. Ammonia fumes in a hot, poorly ventilated room could sting eyes, burn throats, and make apprentices gag. You've seen boys turn green at the oven door, stumbling outside for air, only to be dragged back in. And yet, the demand for bread never slowed, so neither could you. Customers wanted soft loaves that lasted, and chemicals sometimes delivered that illusion. But bread that rose too quickly often collapsed, leaving hollow gaps inside. Bakers called them tunnels. When this happened, apprentices got the blame for kneading wrong, though the fault usually lay in the master's shortcuts. You, of course, bite your tongue rather than point it out. Survival here isn't about honesty, it's about silence. Even the timing of fermentation was fiddled with. Instead of letting dough rest overnight, bakers pushed it through in hours, eager to sell by dawn. You work faster, the rhythm frantic, the dough hardly having time to breathe. There's a faint sadness in it, as if the bread itself resents being rushed. But here's the cruel punchline: for all the experiments, customers rarely complained. Hunger dulled discernment. Bread filled bellies, and in an era of scarcity, no one could afford to question whether their daily loaf doubled as a mild toxin. You wipe your hands on your apron, staring at the bubbling troughs, the unnatural rise. The bakery smells sharper now, tinged with chemicals and coal. You wonder what your lungs have taken in today, what your stomach will absorb tonight when you steal a scrap. And yet, when the bell clangs again, you reach for another sack of flour. Because no matter what's mixed in, the bread must keep rising. The bakery has no clocks, at least none that matter. Time is measured by the swell of dough, the crackle of coal, and the toll of that cursed bell. You, the weary apprentice, have long since lost track of day and night. Your shift stretches endlessly, a blur of kneading, hauling, coughing, and sweating. Sleep is rationed like sugar, rare, precious, and never enough. Victorian bakers were notorious for night work. Bread had to be ready by dawn, which meant ovens blazed through the darkness while the rest of the city slumbered. You trudged through the hours half awake, brain buzzing, body aching, eyelids fluttering dangerously near collapse. And still, the master shouts for more coal. More flour, more speed. By sunrise, when others yawn and stretch at the start of their day, you've already put in a full shift. The sleeplessness creeps into your thoughts. You find yourself staring at the same lump of dough for too long, kneading in slow motion, forgetting whether you've added salt or not. Mistakes happen, loaves collapse, crusts burn, sacks tear open. The punishment is swift, a scolding, a cuff to the ear, sometimes a full day without food. Your mind fogs further, and suddenly even the simplest tasks feel like riddles. Historians still argue whether the constant fatigue caused more accidents than the coal fumes or the flour dust. But the record is clear: exhausted bakers burned themselves, mishandled blades, and toppled into ovens more often than anyone wanted to admit. The line between a good shift and disaster was razor thin. Here's a quirky tidbit: some bakers supposedly napped standing up, leaning against the warm brick of the oven, head bobbing dangerously close to the hatch. One even claimed he dreamed of kneading while actually doing it, his hands moving automatically as his brain floated elsewhere. A kind of Victorian sleepworking, long before anyone coined the term. The monotony is its own punishment. You need the same motions, hear the same coughs, smell the same smoke. Hours blur until you feel detached from your own body, a ghost watching yourself at the bench. Sometimes you chuckle at the absurdity: you're shaping bread for others to enjoy while you're too tired to chew a crust yourself. Fatigue plays tricks on the mind. You hear whispers in the flour's hiss, see faces flicker in the oven flames, imagine the bell clanging when it hasn't. Your fellow apprentices aren't immune either. One swears he saw a rat wearing a baker's cap, another claims the dough once pulsed like it had a heartbeat. You laugh at the stories, but privately you wonder if your own mind is fraying. When dawn finally breaks, the street outside fills with life. To the customers, your bread looks perfect, golden and inviting. They never see the trembling hands that shaped it, the bloodshot eyes behind the counter. You hand over a loaf and stifle a yawn so wide your jaw cracks. No one notices. Why would they? Bread is bread, and you are invisible. By late morning, when the city hums with energy, you collapse onto your pallet in the back room. The straw scratches your skin, the flour dust makes you cough, and the oven's heat still radiates through the walls. You sleep for an hour, maybe two, before the bell calls you again. And so the cycle continues: nights without rest, days without dreams. A life measured not in years but in loaves. It is one thing to survive sleeplessness, another to survive the air itself. Every breath you take in the bakery feels like swallowing a spoonful of dust. The flour rises in clouds, settling in your nose, your throat, your lungs. It clogs every corner of your body until even a cough brings up white phlegm. Victorian bakers called it the baker's lung, though doctors gave it a fancier name later: pneumoconiosis. That word is long, complicated, and not particularly comforting when you're hacking up what feels like bread dough inside your chest. You drag sacks of flour across the floor, spill some, sweep it, spill more, and there's no escaping it. The air glitters faintly in the lamplight, like you're breathing in powdered stars. Pretty image, right? Too bad those stars are tearing tiny scars inside your lungs with every inhalation. Some apprentices barely made it a few years before their chests tightened so badly they couldn't climb stairs without gasping. Here's a fun aside: there were stories of bakers sneezing so violently that clouds of flour shot out like smoke signals. Some even joked you could measure a man's years in the trade by the thickness of his white mustache, except it wasn't hair, it was residue. And while that image might make you smirk, your chest is already aching as you imagine what's settling deeper inside. Coal dust compounds the problem. The oven never stops burning. And smoke leaks out around the cracks. You cough, you choke, you wave it away, but it creeps back. The combination of flour and coal makes the bakery feel less like a workplace and more like an enormous chimney. Historians still argue whether bakers suffered more from the flour itself or from the unventilated coal smoke, but either way, lungs gave out fast. Doctors occasionally poked their noses into bakeries and wrinkled them in disgust. They wrote about pale young men with hollow chests and a perpetual moist cough. One even observed that bakers died younger than soldiers, and not because they were fighting anyone, unless you count fighting for breath, and then, of course, there's the little matter of lead. Remember that? The alum powder and whitening agents? Mix that with the dust and the coal, and your insides were basically under chemical assault every single day. Victorian bakers were walking laboratories of occupational hazards, and no one seemed inclined to shut the lab down, but you keep working. You breathe in the haze because you must. The bell rings, the dough rises, and bread waits for no man. You tell yourself your cough is just a cold, that the burning in your throat is temporary. The other apprentices nod along, though some of them hack so badly at night that the sound echoes like dogs barking in the dark. You all laugh about it because laughter's easier than admitting you might be coughing yourselves to death. Every so often, a baker doesn't show up for his shift. Chest trouble, someone mutters. Maybe he'll recover, maybe he won't. No one asks too many questions. There are loaves to bake, ovens to stoke, flour to shift. Someone else takes his place, and the cycle rolls on, grinding lungs and bodies into dust just as surely as the mills grind wheat. It's almost poetic. Flour sustains life, yet here it slowly strangles you. Each breath is a paradox, nourishment for others, poison for you. You rub at your aching chest, swallow against the tightness in your throat, and prepare another tray of dough. Because the city waits for breakfast, and breakfast does not care if the baker is slowly suffocating. The bakery is never silent. Even when the ovens dim and the apprentices snatch a moment of rest, the walls seem to whisper. The scurrying in the shadows tells you exactly what you'd rather not know: rats. Plump, bold, and utterly unafraid, they rule the corners of the Victorian bakehouse like tiny, twitch-nosed landlords. You catch one on the flour sacks, another darting across the rafters, tail swinging like a rope. At first you leap to chase them, broom in hand, but soon you realize they don't care. They always come back. Rodents were the inevitable roommates of food production in the 19th century. Where there was flour and grain, there were rats. The sacks made perfect nests. The crumbs scattered across the floor provided buffets, and the warmth of the ovens turned the place into a rodent resort. A single night's scurry could leave entire batches of flour chewed through, riddled with droppings, or worse, corpses. The master would yell, you'd sweep, and the cycle began again. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some apprentices swore that if you baked in a hurry and didn't check your dough carefully, you might trap an unwelcome extra ingredient. Tales circulated of loaves with tails, and though most were probably exaggerations, you do notice the master staring suspiciously at bulges in the bread. Customers, blissfully unaware, nod their morning toast without thinking twice. Pests weren't limited to rats. Roaches darted under benches, flies gathered on sticky scraps, and mites burrowed into grain. A single bag of flour could house a whole ecosystem. You shake your head, wondering if half the texture Victorians talked about was just uninvited protein. Historians still argue whether people knew or simply didn't care. Some claim city dwellers were so accustomed to pest flavors that they considered them part of the bread's character. A horrifying thought, but not impossible. Of course, rodents weren't just disgusting, they carried disease. Typhus, leptospirosis, plague, names whispered like curses. You imagine one bite into bread, one sip of contaminated water, and suddenly half the street is sick. Yet regulation was nearly non-existent. The health inspectors, when they did bother, often looked the other way after a discreet payment. You sometimes joke to yourself that the rats are fellow apprentices, working the night shift. After all, they're up when you are, darting about, gnawing, carrying on. At least they don't have to listen to the master's bell. But there's a darker edge to the humor, because unlike you, the rats look healthier. Their fur shines. Their eyes glimmer, and they scamper with energy. You, meanwhile, stumble, cough, and ache, wondering who truly has the better bargain. One evening you spot a rat perched boldly on the oven ledge, as if mocking your toil. Its whiskers twitch, its body silhouetted against the firelight. For a brief, absurd second, you lock eyes, two creatures bound by the same space yet worlds apart. You, chained by duty, it, free to scurry where it pleases. You chuckle softly, a weary laugh that echoes through the smoky air, before turning back to need. The dough waits, the rats wait, and so does the city. By mid-morning, the bakery is no longer a quiet workshop but a living, wheezing beast, breathing heat, smoke, and dust from every corner. The walls themselves seem to sweat with steam, and the floor is a patchwork of damp stains, flour scatterings, and half-scrubbed spills. You notice the subtle, sour tang of something off, not coal, not flour, not yeast, but the unmistakable hint of germs, though the word itself hasn't yet taken root in common knowledge. What you smell is neglect made invisible, the water in buckets grown cloudy with repeated use, rags stiff with crusted dough, tools wiped but never truly cleaned. In such conditions, the smallest lapse grows quickly into contamination. The Victorian world did not yet bow to germ theory, sanitation was a matter of habit and thrift more than science. Bakers often reused water until it grew gray, claiming it softened the dough, though in reality it only softened resistance to disease. Floor sweepings, swept hurriedly into piles, sometimes found their way into mixing bowls, an accidental seasoning that no one admitted to but everyone half expected. Grain itself could be treacherous, moldy from damp storage, riddled with weevils, or harboring the eggs of parasites too small for the eye to catch. A loaf, round and golden, could carry within it an entire invisible kingdom, waiting for a host. You pause near a tray of dough. Domed gently beneath a damp cloth. The yeasty air rising from it is warm, comforting, and unsettling. To think that something so fragrant might also conceal sickness unsettles you, and you shiver, not from cold but from unease. Historians would later debate whether such everyday contaminations caused genuine epidemics or whether necessity hardened stomachs to withstand what would flatten a modern diner. Perhaps survival itself was the best proof of adaptation. A quirky belief persists among some bakers, that a sprinkling of barn dust or even the occasional insect lent bread a rustic authenticity. Tiny legs, stray husks, or fragments of wings were brushed aside as harmless, protein, even. Imagine biting into a crust and finding an odd crunch, a nutty aftertaste, never realizing it was part of a cricket. What horrifies you now might have been considered nothing more than character then, but vermin were no laughing matter. The bakery's warmth, its endless supply of flour, and its dark corners made it irresistible to rats and mice. You see one dart along the far wall, its slick body moving with confidence, as if it too belongs to the workforce. They carried with them more than hunger, fleas, filth, disease, silent passengers that spread typhoid, cholera, or worse. Flies were constant companions as well, dancing above cooling loaves before settling to sip unseen moisture from dough or crumbs. In a contest between rodent and council, you suspect the rodent would win every time, and yet, somehow, the rhythm held. Bread continued to reach stalls, shops, and households. Loaves passed from bakers' hands to mothers' baskets to children's mouths, most of them eaten without catastrophe. Trust in the baker was less a choice than a necessity. Who else could feed so many mouths, day after day, with such constancy? The bakery became a linchpin of survival. A daily gamble the public accepted, perhaps without ever knowing the risks. Some bakers did take pride in cleanliness. You hear stories of vinegar-soaked cloths, of counters scoured until wood shone pale, of flours sifted carefully to shake out pests. These efforts were noble but uneven, for time was short and demand unrelenting. Productivity, not purity, dictated practice. The acrid tang of vinegar was rare, the sweet must of yeast and the smoky grit of coal dominated. You glance at your own hands. The knuckles cracked from heat, the nails blackened from soot and ash, the skin etched with flour that clings like a second layer. These hands shape dough even as they carry filth, pressing into loaves that will be broken and shared at tables across the city. Each loaf, you realize, is more than food, it is a vessel of survival, stitched together with sweat, soot, and luck. As you slide a tray into the gaping oven, its flames roaring like a ravenous mouth, you reflect on the paradox: bread is life, bread is danger. And outside, when you glimpse a child tugging at a mother's skirt, pointing eagerly toward the baker's counter for a slice of steaming loaf, you understand why the risk is taken. Hunger does not wait for hygiene. The bakery may harbor death, but its bread sustains life, and in this precarious balance, the city endures. By afternoon, the bakery no longer feels frantic but instead heavy with repetition, a tense rhythm that clings to every movement. The ovens roar with steady hunger, their doors groaning as they open and shut, swallowing raw loaves and belching waves of scorching heat. Coal hisses when damp dust hits it, sending up acrid whiffs that sting the eyes. Apprentices move like shadows across the flour-strewn floor, their bodies memorizing the cycle: knead, shape, fire, repeat, until action becomes instinct. The air tastes of ash, sweat, and fatigue, though outside the city hums along, unaware of the invisible drama playing out inside this brick and flour chamber, but change is stirring. The word sanitary, once an afterthought, now circulates among reformers and city officials with increasing urgency. Whispers drift into the bakery: laws are coming, inspections are imminent, and soon the secrets of bread-making will no longer be hidden from scrutiny. Reformers argue that bread, the staple of the working classes, must be safe, untainted by greed or negligence. Masters, meanwhile, mutter darkly that regulation will ruin tradition, that officials meddle in a craft they scarcely understand. By the mid to late Victorian period, public anger over adulterated loaves had boiled into moral outrage. Scandals filled newspapers: plaster of Paris in flour, alum to whiten dough, even chalk to extend profits. Whether exaggerated or not, these tales stirred a city's fears. Outcry brought the first sanitary laws, and with them, inspectors. They checked flour quality, measured loaf weights with scales sharp-eyed as judges, and peered into ovens to ensure standards were met. Customers might never meet these men, but their presence pressed down hard on bakers and apprentices alike. Some inspectors were eccentric. One famously tested bread density by dropping loaves from a height, declaring that a properly baked loaf should bounce lightly like a spring lamb rather than collapse into crumbs. Imagine your livelihood judged not by taste or texture, but by physics. Apprentices smothered laughter behind flour-dusted sleeves, but masters stiffened, scrubbing counters, polishing utensils, and adjusting recipes just in case their own bread should fail the bounce test. The reforms carried with them a sense of moral panic. Broadsheets shouted about poisoned bread, corrupted markets, and unscrupulous bakers conspiring to sell toxic loaves to innocent families. Mothers, frightened, eyed their morning purchases with suspicion. The reality was murkier. While some practices were indeed dangerous, much of the panic was inflated by sensational headlines. Yet, the effect was undeniable. Small bakers were forced to adapt, implementing regular cleaning routines, improving grain storage, or, where possible, installing crude ventilation to carry away the haze of flour dust and smoke. You notice the change yourself. The air seems marginally clearer, the acrid sting of coal softened, the counters brushed more frequently. Even the smell of the bakery feels lighter, less oppressive. Tiny adjustments, perhaps, but meaningful ones. Still, resistance simmers. Masters quietly resent interference, arguing that profit margins shrink with every new regulation. Some circumvent openly, disguising additives under unfamiliar names, or experimenting with new chemicals not yet outlawed. Regulation and profit lock into a quiet, exhausting tug-of-war. Caught in the middle, apprentices bear the brunt. They must memorize the new rules, implement them daily, and, when masters cut corners, devise ways to conceal mistakes from inspectors' sharp eyes. It is a confusing world, full of contradictions. On one hand, the promise of safer bread, on the other, the constant risk of punishment for errors not entirely their own. You knead dough with tense arms as an inspector paces behind, boots tapping the flour-dusted flagstones. Every cough you stifle, every scatter of flour you sweep too hastily, feels like a potential crime. A single misplaced scoop could draw a reprimand. And yet, beneath the coil of anxiety, there is a flicker of satisfaction. For the loaf you shape now, heavier, cleaner, watched over, may indeed be safer than the one you baked yesterday. In that thought lies a fragile sense of progress. The bell clangs, sharp as steel. Flour clouds rise into golden afternoon light, drifting like smoke toward the rafters. Outside, hunger presses on the doors, a reminder that no regulation can halt appetite. The city waits impatiently, stomachs rumbling, children tugging at skirts, men counting coins for their daily bread. You realize, standing in the thick of it, that reform is now part of the rhythm, woven into the cycle of coal, dough, and fire. Not an enemy, but another force to balance, another burden to bear. So you keep moving. Kneading with care, breathing cautiously, and shaping loaves as though each might carry the fate of both your livelihood and your city. The bread must rise, the people must eat, and life, fragile, smoky, and dusty, goes on. Here's the quirky detail: masters, even the harshest ones, sometimes allowed apprentices tiny rewards in the form of sugared crusts or leftover scraps of luxury bread. A sprinkling of sugar, a dab of spice, perhaps a smear of fruit paste, pitiful by any standard, but cherished all the same. Tonight you cradle such a crust in your flour-blackened hands, its sweetness melting across your tongue with shocking vividness, dulling the bitterness of the day if only for a few seconds. It is more than a treat, it is ritual, a fragile thread that ties endurance to the faint promise of pleasure. In the corners, rats stir. Their claws scratch faintly on stone, their squeaks blending with the crackle of coal. They have grown bolder, accustomed to your rhythms, darting across the floor when crumbs fall or a sack spills. Some apprentices, resigned, turn the infestation into a game, dropping crusts deliberately and snatching them back at the last second, a contest of reflex against hunger. Absurd, yes, but it passes the time and grants fleeting moments of victory, a rat thwarted, a loaf saved, a laugh suppressed before the master notices. You cannot decide whether the game speaks more to desperation or ingenuity, but either way it feels like survival in miniature. Sanitation still looms in the background, less a daily reality than a distant rumor. Reformers whisper of stricter inspections. But here and now, you wash trays with lukewarm water, scrub boards with cloths worn thin and gray, their original whiteness long forgotten. The motions are partly practical, partly theatrical. Everyone knows that an inspector's sudden visit could mean fines, public shame, or even closure, so vigilance is both genuine and performative. The master grumbles loudly about wasted effort, but even he cannot resist pausing now and then to glance into shadowed corners, muttering about appearances. Evening creeps over the city, shadows stretching long across the cobbled streets, though inside the bakery the only light comes from the fire's relentless glow and the weak lanterns swinging from iron chains overhead. The flames lick the oven's mouth with a dull roar, painting walls with trembling orange and black patterns, while the lanterns sway just enough to make flour dust glitter faintly in the dimness, like a pale snowfall suspended in air. The day's work is far from done. Loaves cool on wooden racks, trays lean haphazardly against walls waiting to be scrubbed, the oven floor demands scraping, and the coal, ever hungry, requires constant feeding. Your body protests with every movement, shoulders ache from hauling. Lungs rasp with the scratch of soot, and your fingers are raw, the skin hardened and split from endless kneading. Yet you trudge forward. There is no pause, no mercy, only the slow, endless motion of survival. Apprentices often work 16 hours a day, sometimes more, the line between day and night blurred into one long cycle of heat, smoke, and fatigue. Victorian labor laws barely existed for children, what little was written often went unenforced. Masters measured productivity by volume, not health, and apprentices were expected to endure. The oldest journeyman mutters that some boys never saw their 18th birthday, their lungs ruined or their bodies too frail to withstand the grind. Historians still argue whether mortality was truly so catastrophic, but you don't need statistics to see truth. The chorus of coughing, the pallor of faces too young to be so worn, the hollow-eyed fatigue carved deep into your fellow workers. The evidence is all around you, breathing shallowly, still pushing dough across the bench, and yet, amid this severity, there are pockets of humanity. Apprentices learn quickly. Cleanliness is not just hygiene, it is choreography, a careful staging designed to appease the watchful eyes of authority. The fire's glow warms the back room, but its heat carries menace as well as comfort. Sparks leap unpredictably from the coal, tiny meteors that sting when they land on skin. You flinch as one brushes your wrist, leaving a bright, hot welt, the pain sharp enough to bring tears to tired eyes. Around you, other apprentices bear similar marks, badges of toil carved in burns and scars. Some call them trophies, proof of resilience, but the laughter that follows is too thin to hide exhaustion. Pain has become normalized, as much a part of the bakery as flour or fire. And yet, despite all this, despite fatigue, vermin, burns, and dust, you cannot ignore the artistry that somehow survives. Loaves emerge golden, their crusts splitting open in graceful ridges, their interiors airy and delicate. The smell, rich and yeasty, fills every corner of the bakery and drifts out into the streets, coaxing smiles from passers-by and hunger from the weary. For a moment, you pause, inhaling deeply, letting the aroma eclipse the stench of sweat and coal. This, you realize, is why the work continues, not for profit, not for law, but for the daily miracle of bread. As night settles heavy outside and the city's noise dwindles to the distant rattle of a cart or the bark of a dog, the bakery continues to hum, its heart still beating. You are exhausted beyond words, yet there is a strange rhythm in your body that matches the rhythm of this place. Knead, scrape, feed the fire, shape the loaf, repeat. It is an unending dance, brutal yet oddly harmonious. Each loaf you slide from the oven feels like both a burden and a triumph, proof that survival, yours, the bakery's, the city's, is possible for one more day. You smile faintly through cracked lips, knowing that tomorrow will demand the same relentless devotion, the same aching body, the same dance with heat and hunger. But for tonight, you breathe, you chew the last sugared crust, you let the smell of warm bread fill your lungs. The world is harsh, the work unyielding, but you have survived another day, and in this fragile victory lies all the sweetness life can spare. Night deepens, and the bakery becomes a world unto itself. Shadows stretch long across the brick walls, and the only sounds are the crackle of dying coals, the occasional cough, and the soft scraping of wooden boards. The city outside sleeps, oblivious, while inside, your senses remain on high alert. Every movement matters, every loaf carries weight beyond mere flour and water. Apprentices sometimes whisper stories to keep themselves awake, tales of former bakers who vanished under mysterious circumstances, lungs failing, accidents with coal, falls into ovens. You listen, half believing, half amused, but the caution in each story lingers. Victorian apprenticeship was brutal, and rumors of early death were almost routine, serving as both warning and dark entertainment. Historians still argue whether these tales were exaggerated or based on common experience, but the fear they instill is tangible. Here's a quirky tidbit. One journeyman swore that humming to the dough improved its rise. You try it once, softly, a low note vibrating through the mixture, and swear the dough feels friendlier. Whether it's magic or coincidence, you don't care. The ritual offers a strange comfort amidst smoke, coal, and flour storms. The coal fire has burned low, leaving a reddish glow that makes shadows dance across the walls like silent spectators. You lean against the oven, chest tight from coughing, and wonder how many others have stood in this same posture. Sensing both danger and satisfaction simultaneously. Life in the Victorian bakery is a paradox, beautiful, deadly, exhausting, and oddly poetic. Rats still scuttle, emboldened by darkness. One cheeky creature pauses mid-scurry to stare at you with tiny, glimmering eyes. You almost laugh, but cough instead, sending it skittering. You realize that this night, like all others, is a battle for space, for survival, for control of the tiny ecosystem that is the bakery. You work, they work, the ovens work, and somehow, everyone survives. Sleep remains elusive. Even when you finally collapse on the straw mattress, your mind hums with dough and coal. You imagine the bell clangs repeating in slow motion, the smell of flour thick in your nose, the sting of chemical leavening on your tongue. And yet, there is solace here, the day is ending. The loaves are done, and for a few hours, at least, the relentless pace relaxes. You think of the city outside, of hungry mouths awaiting your labor, and realize the strange honor in your suffering. The flour, the coal, the smoke, the rats, the chemicals, all are sacrifices in a silent, invisible service. Tomorrow will come, as it always does, demanding more, but tonight, you allow yourself a moment of fragile pride. By the faint firelight, you trace the shapes of bread cooling on the racks, marveling at their perfection against the chaos of creation. And as sleep finally draws near, you know this life is dangerous, dusty, exhausting, but it is also your story, carried in every loaf that leaves these walls. Dawn approaches again, softening the edges of night with pale light. You're already awake, of course, knees aching, lungs tight, hands raw. The bakery never truly sleeps, and neither can you. You trudge to the coal pile, shovel in hand, and feed the ovens as if performing a ritual older than memory. Smoke curls lazily now, mixing with the faint scent of warm dough, creating a strange, intoxicating perfume. The apprentices stir, faces ghostly in the dim morning, and you all begin the familiar dance. Flour dust hangs suspended in the golden light, turning the bakery into a suspended cloud of particles. Each movement stirs more dust, and you inhale deeply out of habit, feeling your lungs tighten. Yet oddly, also enlivened. Survival here is a strange mixture of horror and rhythm, a daily negotiation with danger. Historians still argue whether the steady, grueling pace improved skill or merely punished the body, but there is no question it forged discipline, and sometimes, madness. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some bakers would deliberately leave flour footprints around the floor, marking where apprentices had worked the most. It was a silent record of labor, a ghostly signature visible only to those who knew the bakery intimately. You glance down and see the faint impressions of yesterday, a breadcrumb map of toil etched in dust. The ovens roar to life as the first loaves of the day go in. The master checks each one with a practiced eye, tapping crusts, sniffing dough, adjusting coal. You move between trays, repeating motions perfected through exhaustion: knead, shape, dust, slide, repeat. Every shift feels identical, yet each carries the subtle variations of life and survival, the slight change in humidity, a mismeasured scoop of flour, the tiniest spark from the coal. Rats, now bold in the dim light, emerge once more. You chase one away, only to find another perched confidently on the windowsill, tail twitching. The pests, the smoke, the chemical-laden dough, they're all constants in your world. You might curse them, laugh at them, or ignore them entirely, but you know they're here to stay. Much like exhaustion, heat, and danger, the city outside begins to awaken. Children shout, carriages rattle, and street vendors call. The first customers queue for bread, oblivious to the ordeal behind the counter. You hand over a warm loaf, coughing lightly, and watch as they disappear into the streets, satisfied, hungry, trusting. Their survival depends on your labor. Your endurance, your willingness to wrest order from chaos. You pause, breath shaking, and survey the bakery, coal-fed ovens, flour clouds lingering in sunbeams, loaves cooling on racks, rats disappearing into shadows. It's a world of danger, repetition, and strange beauty. You breathe in smoke, dust, and faint sweet aroma, knowing the rhythm will continue, as it always does, until the city is fed once more. And you? You are its hidden pulse, unseen but indispensable, caught between exhaustion and mastery, danger and creation. The sun climbs higher, spilling pale light across the street, but inside the bakery, the heat from the ovens makes the day feel like midsummer in a furnace. You trudge from bench to coal pit, from flour barrel to rising trough, a blur of motion and fatigue. Your muscles burn, your lungs tighten, and your hands bear the marks of endless labor, yet the rhythm, the relentless pulse of fire, dough, and sweat, carries you forward. Victorian bakers were trapped in this cycle, and apprentices like you even more so. Shifts began before dawn, stretched endlessly, and ended only when the last loaf left the oven. There was no weekend, no holiday, no pause in the bread-dependent world. Historians still argue how much choice apprentices truly had. Though evidence suggests that leaving wasn't easy, debts to masters, contracts, and social expectations all tied you to this hazardous life, quirky details cling to memory, the way a loaf might sing faintly as it cooled, a slight whistle of escaping steam, the tiny rat that occasionally rode along in your apron pocket, the way chemical leavening hissed when mixed with water, like a secret language only you could hear. These minor absurdities were balm against the relentless grind, giving the mind something to latch onto in the haze of exhaustion, adulteration, coal smoke, flour clouds, vermin, sleeplessness. These were constants, threats, companions, and teachers. You recognize patterns now, which oven corner produces the crispiest crust. Which flour batch needs less water, which apprentice cough heralds collapse. Experience and survival have become intertwined, a delicate balance of vigilance, endurance, and intuition. By mid-morning, the master inspects your work, nods at the rising loaves, and moves on. Coal must be fed, dough kneaded, and fires monitored. Every shift is simultaneously mundane and perilous. You realize the strange paradox of this existence: danger is omnipresent, yet the act of survival is almost routine. You find comfort in the rhythm, even as it erodes body and spirit. The bell clangs again, signaling another delivery, another round of labor. You carry loaves to the street, lungs burning, arms aching, but with a strange sense of accomplishment. Each loaf is a testament to resilience, a fragile victory over smoke, dust, chemical tricks, and the human body's limits. The city eats, oblivious, sustained by your unseen labor, and for a moment, you allow yourself pride amidst the suffering. As afternoon arrives, the bakery settles into a lull. You lean against a bench, sweat mixing with flour dust on your skin, and close your eyes briefly, letting the rhythm of coal, smoke, and dough lull you into a fragile peace. Tomorrow will demand the same, the day after that as well, yet for now, you are alive, and the loaves stand golden and perfect before you. You exhale, lungs tight but functioning, and marvel at how survival feels simultaneously miraculous and mundane. The bustle fades. The ovens cool, and the smell of warm bread softens into a gentle, lingering scent. Dust hangs lightly in the air, settled for a moment, giving you a pause you rarely experience. You lie back on the straw pallet, feeling each muscle slowly unwind, every aching joint releasing tension, every cough fading into mere memory. Your breath eases as you let the body rest, heart slowing, mind shedding the anxieties of coal, flour, and chemical experiments. Outside, the city murmurs softly, distant and unthreatening, while inside, the bakery is quiet, almost reverent. Loaves cool on racks, golden and patient, bearing witness to the labor, danger, and care of the night and day. Even the rats have retreated to shadows, and the faint flicker of the dying coals casts a warm glow across the walls. You can almost imagine the bakery as a gentle, breathing entity, its rhythm now calm, a heartbeat you can rest beside. You think of the apprentices who came before you, the countless hands kneading, shaping, enduring, and surviving in the haze of smoke and dust. You feel connected to them, a chain of silent perseverance that stretches through time. The hazards remain, coal, flour, chemicals, but for now, they recede, and you allow the body and mind a quiet reprieve. Slowly, your eyes grow heavy. The taste of warm bread lingers faintly on your tongue, the air smells of smoke and yeast, and the world outside continues in gentle motion. You drift, imagining the loaves rising peacefully, the fire reduced to a soft glow, and the bakery resting in a rare, fleeting peace. Your chest rises and falls, steady and calm. Danger and labor will return with the next bell, but for this moment, you are suspended between exhaustion and serenity, breathing softly, resting in the echo of survival, letting the day fade gently into night.